My mornings had always been the sanctuary where I reclaimed a sense of order and peace. The ritual of opening the shutters to let the soft sunlight spill across the wooden floor, the familiar scent of aged paper and polished mahogany rising along with the aroma from the kettlelit was comfort, a tether to the steady heartbeat of a life built on devotion. The family business stood quietly in the corner of my world like an old friend, weathered but resilient, a testament to my late husband's vision and our shared sacrifices. It was not just a company, it was the fabric that wove us together, a legacy handed down through generations, thick with stories of hardship and triumph. I spent the early hours tending to the details, the ledgers that still bore my husband's neat handwriting, the contracts faded by time but never by relevance. Each item in my modest office spoke of a lifetime's work, a promise of continuity, and an unspoken bond that tied my family to something greater than ourselves. The soft ticking of the clock accompanied my thoughts, steady and sure, until the dinner bell broke the morning silence. That evening, as the family gathered around the oak dining table, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, I noticed something was different. Daniel, my youngest son, seemed unsettled. He avoided my gaze, his hands nervously tracing the edge of his plate. Sarah, his wife, sat beside him with an air of expectant impatience, the kind that made my skin crawl without immediate warning. I decided to trust them, as I always had, letting the warmth of family drown out the faint whisper of unease creeping inside me. Then came the words that shattered my fragile peace. Daniel laid out his plan, casually but with an urgency I could not ignore. He wanted to sell the family business, to hand over the legacy built on the sweat and tears of those who came before us, to those who cared nothing for the roots that held it firm. The room seemed to close in around me, gravity pulling me into a cold numbness. I stared, unblinking, as if the words were a mirage. Why would he do this? Why would he betray the foundation my husband and I had built with utter devotion? I could feel the air thickening, cherished photographs on the walls, old trophies that glimmered faintly in the fading light, relics of a proud past. They now seemed fragile, as if Daniel's decision threatened to crumble them all. The betrayal sank deep, a sharp pinprick in my chest that spread silently, numbing all the familiar comforts I had known. The business was more than a source of income. It was a monument to love, resilience, and countless sacrifices. Daniel's greed was not just a betrayal of me, but of the entire family history, the quiet days and long nights spent holding everything together. My hands trembled slightly as I excused myself from the table, the sound of the silverware striking the plates echoing in my ears like a distant warning bell. In the solitude of my room, I tried to catch my breath, but the weight of the revelation pressed down on me relentlessly. Memories swirled, late nights balancing books while the house was silent, the way my husband's eyes would light up at the promise of growth, the stories we told our children about honor, hard work, and legacy. Those values had been etched deep into my soul, and now they seemed under threat from the very person I had raised to cherish them. I found myself wandering through the rooms that had once been filled with laughter and hope. Each corner whispered reminders of a simpler time when family came first. The shell of the business stood at the heart of it all, vulnerable now, exposed to the cold ambitions festering silently among those I had trusted most. A quiet agony settled over me, the kind that does not scream but seeps into every thought, every breath. And yet, amid the sorrow, there was a flicker, subtle, almost imperceptible, the realization that this was not just a loss but a turning point. Though the pain felt like it might suffocate me, it also ignited a steely determination. This business, my family's legacy, was not something I could allow to slip away quietly. I needed to understand the depth of Daniel's betrayal fully, to find a way forward without shattering what remained of my heart. The night deepened around the house, wrapping me in its quiet embrace. Tears blurred the vision of the framed photographs on the mantelpiece, but I did not wipe them away. They were a testament to a life of endurance, a silent oath that, even in the face of profound pain, I would not be broken. This was the moment where everything shifted, the routine of peace replaced by the storm of betrayal. And with it came the first whisper of a silent strength I would need to find within myself. The morning light struggled to penetrate the heavy curtains, casting a muted glow over the quiet house. But inside me a storm raged, restless and raw. I sat in my usual spot by the window, the familiar garden beyond feeling strangely distant, as if the world I once knew had shifted beneath my feet. Daniel's words echoed relentlessly in my mind, his intention to sell the family business. That business, this legacy, had been the cornerstone of our family's identity, painstakingly nurtured over decades by my husband and me. It was not merely assets and contracts. It was the living history of our sacrifices, hopes, and dreams. I remembered the countless nights when the house was silent except for the rustling of ledgers and the scratch of my pen as I meticulously balanced accounts. Daniel had been a child then, curious and attentive whenever I explained the value behind every figure, every decision. I had taught him that wealth was a responsibility, a duty handed down, not something to be exploited recklessly. Now, that teaching seemed to have fallen on deaf ears, overshadowed by a hunger for quick gain. I pictured his younger self, eyes bright with admiration and a deep respect for the business that had given him his place in the world. How had that boy grown into a man so eager to tear down the very foundation I had spent a lifetime reinforcing? And Sarah's presence loomed heavily in all this, a whispering shadow, pushing Daniel towards choices shaped more by greed than gratitude. They spoke of sales, deals, and buyers, language foreign to the legacy tied to honor and family. Confrontation, I realized, would only fan the flames of resentment and deepen the divide. Shouting, pleading, or accusations would serve no purpose with someone so determined. Instead, I resolved to embrace silence not as a surrender, but as a strategy. To observe, to wait, to gather strength unseen. My husband and I had weathered storms, not by force alone, but through calm endurance and the power of patience. Like the old oak in our yard, deep and steadfast roots would hold firm, even against the fiercest winds. In the quiet of the empty house, I wandered rooms thick with yesterday's laughter and faded hopes. The worn armchair where my husband once sat with his endless papers and plans felt like a sacred altar of wisdom. I touched the pages of those documents, turning my attention to a detail I had purposefully kept close: an obscure reversion clause in the company's founding charter. Few knew of its existence except those who had labored alongside my husband closely. The clause promised to protect the company from the hands of those unworthy of its stewardship. Daniel did not suspect its power. This clause was more than legal text. It was a lifeline, a promise from my husband to shield what he loved most. As I read those faded words, I felt the stirrings of hope. This was the leverage I needed, not to confront recklessly, but to reclaim what was rightfully ours. Days passed in a quiet rhythm. I immersed myself in the details, devouring every contract, every letter, every document that related to the clause. I felt like a secret keeper awakening a sleeping giant. With every discovery, my resolve strengthened. I was not powerless. I was preparing silently to act. I watched Daniel and Sarah closely, noting their overconfidence, their hasty discussions in dim corridors, their excitement and impatience. Every misstep they made was a thread I could pull to unravel their scheme. I catalogued their conversations mentally, one by one, without their awareness. My silence was not emptiness but a shield, the quiet before the storm. Reminders of the past returned often. The lessons woven into bedtime stories, the values silently instilled at the family table. Resilience, patience, honor. Those lessons were now my armor. I understood that my pain was a crucible, forging me into someone far stronger than I had imagined. I was no longer a woman shattered by betrayal, but a matriarch defending her family's soul with resolve as steady as the tide. The house, once filled with the warmth of shared lives, had become a stage for my silent strategy. I moved carefully among memories and shadows, preparing for the eventual confrontation without haste or reckless emotion. At times, tears would prick the corners of my eyes, blurring the faded portraits hanging on the mantelpiece, images of my husband and our children, frozen in happier times. But I let those tears fall freely, a silent tribute to the life we built and the trials we faced. The pain molded me, but it did not destroy me. In the stillness of long nights, I found an unexpected peace, not a naive hope, but a profound certainty that I would reclaim my place. The legacy was not lost. It was simply waiting for the right moment to be restored. This was no longer a battle of words and anger. It was a careful orchestration of wisdom, patience, and silent power. I had learned that strength often lies not in loud protests but in the quiet mastery of circumstance. And so, I prepared myself watchful, patient, and unyielding. The future belonged to those who could wait and plan with steady hands. In this silence, I found a new kind of strength, one born from the very pain of betrayal, but sharpened into a promise of justice. The days ahead were uncertain, but for the first time since Daniel's announcement, I felt a quiet confidence rise within me, a steady flame fueled by love, resilience, and irrevocable hope. I was ready to fight for everything we had built, not with anger, but with the silent power of resolve. The days that followed my silent resolve were filled with purposeful calmness, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning in my heart. I moved through the house with quiet determination, every action deliberate, measured. I needed to know everything, the hidden details, the vulnerabilities, the very documents that could become my greatest weapon against betrayal. The reversion clause, buried deep within the founding papers, was my compass, and I was resolute in tracing its roots. I spent hours surrounded by the fading scent of leather-bound folders and the yellowed pages that held my husband's careful handwriting. Each document was a fragment of the past, a testament to caution and foresight. I marveled at the precision with which my husband, a man of modest words but sharp intellect, had safeguarded our future in ways even Daniel could never have imagined. The clause was unassailable, a legal fortress built to protect the business from loss to unworthy hands. I was holding my family's salvation in these fragile pages, yet I knew this alone would not be enough. I needed allies, someone with expertise, someone I could trust. The thought of Daniel's betrayal made my throat tighten, but I could not allow bitterness to cloud my judgment. I had to be shrewd, to wield strategy instead of emotion. The first person who came to mind was Judith, my late husband's trusted attorney from early days of the company and unwavering guardian of the family's best interests, a woman as methodical and persistent as I needed to be now. Though years had passed since we last spoke, I believed she would remember her oath, and more importantly, the history entwined with those documents. Calling her felt like reaching out into the past, but her voice on the other end of the line steadied me. The familiar tone, firm and precise, was a salve I hadn't known I needed. I arranged to meet her at her office, a place filled with the scent of old books and quiet authority. Walking into those walls was like stepping into a sanctum of justice and experience. I wasn't there to plead or beg. I was there to forge a path forward. Sliding the folder across her polished desk, I watched Judith's eyes scan the dense lines of the clause. She raised a questioning brow, and I breathed deeply before recounting Daniel's plan to sell the business. She listened carefully, the weight of betrayal unspoken but understood between us. Without emotion, she pointed out the clause's strength and its potential to block any unauthorized sale. My heart surged with a quiet victory, but Judith cautioned me on the necessity of absolute proof and precise timing. Her counsel became my blueprint. I could not afford reckless moves or premature exposures. Daniel's greed was dangerous, but his overconfidence was an opening. I resolved to collect evidence of his intentions, documenting every plan, every conversation I could discreetly observe or verify through trustworthy sources. Over the following weeks, I moved like a shadow through the company's corridors, invisible but attentive. I revisited every meeting Daniel had with clients and legal advisors, sat through endless calls he made, recorded the aggressive deals Sarah encouraged, all without revealing my awareness. My patience became a weapon, quiet but deadly. I also secured copies of recent transactions and correspondence, piecing together a tapestry of Daniel's betrayal. I felt the acute burden of this sneaky investigation, but I reminded myself that this burden was a rite of passage. Few would understand the pain of having a son turn against you, but this was about more than grief. It was about justice without spectacle, about reclaiming something that had been entrusted to me by blood and sacrifice. As the evidence mounted, so did my confidence. I was no longer a passive observer but a strategist in command of the situation. With Judith's guidance, I began drafting the legal petitions necessary to activate the clause decisively but discreetly. The documents needed to be flawless, every line meticulously crafted to withstand scrutiny and opposition. In the late evenings, with only the soft glow of my desk lamp illuminating the room, I reviewed the drafts, crossing out and rewriting sections, tightening the language like an artisan perfecting a masterpiece. Each revision was a step closer to reclaiming control, a quiet protest against the betrayal that had almost destroyed us. Beyond the legal preparations, I also began to organize the private side of the business: personal keepsakes, photographs, and mementos that signified the legacy we had built. I placed them carefully in a box I locked away, a symbolic act that mirrored my emotional journey. These items were more than relics. They were the heartbeats of our family history, reminders of sacrifice, love, and perseverance. I noticed subtle changes in Daniel during this time. His demeanor grew sharper, his steps quicker, but also less certain, as if he sensed an unseen presence guarding against his plans. Though he never looked directly at me with suspicion, I felt his awareness simmering beneath the surface. Sarah remained the eager accomplice, but there was something in Daniel's eyes, a flicker of anxiety I did not recall before. One evening, I overheard a whispered conversation between them in the hall. They spoke of lawyers and contracts, deadlines to finalize the sale. Their haste confirmed the urgency of my own preparations. Every moment counted, every detail mattered. I paced slowly through the old house later, feeling the weight of history pressing in on me, but also the fire of determination that now claimed me. This was no longer merely about business, it was personal. This was about reclaiming my home, my dignity, and the future for my grandchildren, who deserved to know a family that honored its roots and never surrendered to betrayal. I was remodeling myself with patience and precision, turning sorrow into strategy, tears into justice. The silent queen within me was awakening, fully calm, steady, and unyielding. The path ahead was treacherous, filled with unknowns, but I moved forward regardless, armed with knowledge, evidence, and the unbreakable will to protect what was mine. It was a fight without cries, without threats, a battle waged in shadows and whispers, but one I was determined to win. And in that quiet determination, the house began to feel like my fortress once more. Each step I took reaffirmed my claim. Each whisper of paper turning beneath my fingers was a step toward reclaiming the legacy Daniel sought to sell. This was my moment to rise from the ashes of betrayal and to lay the foundations for a future where trust, respect, and justice would reign supreme once again. That night, when I quietly slipped into the old office, the heart of everything my husband and I had built over so many years, I felt the weight of memory and purpose settle over me like a heavy cloak. Daniel was already trying to make this space his own, scattering papers, changing the arrangement of the room, the air humming with his unspoken claim. But to me, this room still held the pulse of our family legacy. Tonight, it would become the arena of my subtle reclamation. Every step I took carried the echo of the past, the soft murmur of countless hours spent here with my husband, poring over plans and hopes. The worn wood beneath my feet seemed to remember all the conversations we had held, the dreams carefully constructed and guarded. The scent that clung to the room was a blend of old paper, polish, and something deeper, determination. Daniel was absent, unaware his presence in this office was about to be quietly but irrevocably challenged. I moved with deliberate care, making each moment count. Opening the safe was like opening a door through time. The cold metal pressed against my skin until the familiar click confirmed my access. Inside lay the treasure trove of our lives as caretakers of the business. Legal papers, contracts, the original founding documents, and amongst them, the reversion clause. It was the lifeline my husband had hidden, a last bastion of defense that Daniel was foolish enough to overlook. I held in my hands the key to stop the sale and reclaim what was ours. My hands were steady as I began composing the legal motions that would activate this clause. Every sentence was chosen with care. I knew a mistakenly worded paragraph could cost us everything. This was more than paperwork. It was a declaration that the legacy would not be usurped in silence. The quiet scratching of my pen on paper filled the night, steady as my heart beat. The stack of documents grew, duplicated carefully to ensure no loophole could be found. Then, I turned my attention to the pieces of family history scattered around the room. I gathered photographs that captured moments of joy and perseverance. My husband and me smiling on the day we won our first major contract, snapshots of the children during simpler times, a faded ledger filled with his carefully penned notes. Each item I packed away with reverence and care, placing them in a wooden box that symbolized more than just memories. It was my claim, my silent protest. Although exhaustion tugged at me, the fire inside remained bright, fed by years of disappointments and quiet hope. This office was no longer just a workplace. It was the battleground where I would fight by strategy and patience, not by outcry or confrontation. Meanwhile, Daniel was growing restless and hasty. I could feel it in his uneasy steps, the way he spoke a little louder to hide anxiety, and the hurried, hushed calls about lawyers and deadlines. My ears caught their whispered strategies as they tiptoed through dreams that were not theirs to grasp. I cataloged each fragment, threading together a timeline that gave me a tactical advantage. With each passing hour, I envisioned the hearings and legal arenas where words would be my weapons. The quiet power of truth and law wielded with precision. I practiced the calm demeanor I would need to carry, the look of confidence coupled with a motherly steadiness that no one could fault. Anger could be easily dismissed, but quiet strength was the foundation of victory. The house itself felt alive, holding its breath as if it understood what was at stake. I paused by my husband's old desk, letting my fingers linger on its surface, feeling the history and responsibility. This was more than a business dispute. It was a fight for the heart of our family, for honor, faithfulness, and the future. Memories of Daniel as a child surfaced in my mind, the eager, trusting boy who had once listened to tales of hard work and sacrifice. That image softened some of the sharp edge of betrayal and made my resolve more profound. I was determined not to be broken by this. Instead, I would rebuild. I worked late into the night, finalizing documents, rehearsing the plan over and over in my mind. When dawn whispered through the windows, I packed materials carefully, sealing my intent in every fold and stamp. Locking the office door behind me, I carried a quiet but fierce promise. This domain was still under my watch. Back in my study, I spread out the pieces of the plan I had crafted with such painstaking care. It was a chess match, and I was moving my pieces with calculated precision. I would wage war not with outbursts but with calculated calm, not with fury but with wisdom shaped by years of love and loss. A profound calm settled over me as sunlight softened the edges of the night's deeds. I was no longer just Evelyn, the widow who once felt powerless. Now, I was the matriarch awakened, ready to reclaim her throne without fanfare, wielding the quiet, unassailable strength of a queen who had endured too much to fail. Daniel may have thought he carried the keys to our future, but I possessed the foundations, the law, the legacy, and the silent, unyielding knowledge born of sacrifice. Now was the moment to act. The coming days would test everything I was made of, but I stood ready to face the challenge. I was prepared to confront the storm with dignity and quiet power, the unshakable force of patience and resolve. In the stillness of that early morning, I sensed the true nature of the legacy resting in my hands. It was not merely bricks and ledgers, but the indomitable spirit of a family's history. Quiet, resolute, unbroken. This was my fight to command, and I would meet it with every ounce of wisdom, courage, and grace. Step by silent step, I would reclaim what was mine, and with it, the future for those who depended on me to protect it. The evening Daniel came home that night. The air was thick with tension, barely concealed beneath the surface of our routine family dinner. I set the table with care, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off the silverware like tiny symbols of the battle that was to come. The room felt familiar and warm, but we were all carrying invisible burdens beneath polite smiles. Daniel's face was set and tight, his eyes glinting with determination, though flickers of doubt betrayed him now and then. Sarah sat beside him, poised and expectant, her impatience barely held at bay. Our meal began quietly, the soft clinks of forks and plates mingling with muted exchanges of polite conversation. Daniel spoke cautiously about the sale, his voice calm but edged with a zealous undercurrent I recognized well. He hid his eagerness beneath restraint, but there was no mistaking the ambitious plan that fueled every syllable. I listened closely, my mind balancing the calm surface with sharp awareness of the undercurrent fighting to break free. Throughout the dinner, my posture and tone remained composed, but my eyes soaked in every flicker of emotion, the slightest shift in his expression, the tension in his hands resting on the table, the pauses that grew longer when I met his gaze. This was not merely a meal, it was a battleground, and I was careful to move with calculated grace. Daniel believed he controlled the game, but I held the hidden queen. When the plates were nearly cleared, I reached slowly for the thick folder I had prepared in secret over many weeks. I slid it across the table toward Daniel, watching closely for his reaction as my fingers brushed the edge. His gaze lifted sharply, confusion flashing through his expression before it hardened into disbelief, and then flickered briefly with anger. My voice was steady, deliberate. Daniel, these papers contain the reversion clause. The clause you never knew existed. The words fell like stones in still water, rippling through the room with undeniable weight. It means the sale cannot move forward without my explicit consent. I am the guardian of this company's future, and I intend to fulfill that role. His jaw clenched hard, the confident mask cracking under the weight of the revelation. Sarah squeezed his hand lightly, but he struggled to steady his gaze. "Mom," he said, voice tight, "this company belongs to all of us. You can't block progress just because you are afraid to let go." I shook my head, a mix of sorrow and firm conviction softening my expression. "This isn't fear, Daniel. It's respect for the hard work and sacrifices that built this business under your grandfather's and my husband's watchful eyes. Your rush betrays how little you understand about what this truly means." Daniel's eyes blazed with frustration. "You're standing in the way of what's best for everyone. If you cared about us, you would let me move forward." The sting of his accusation was sharp, but my voice retained its calm, unwavering. "I care deeply about this family, more than you know. That is why I stand here now, unyielding, to defend the history and future you are risking to surrender." Silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I watched as doubt crept silently into Daniel's eyes, the first cracks in his once steely confidence. "I'm not your enemy, Daniel," I added softly yet firmly. "But I cannot allow this to become the moment our family falls apart. There is time to rebuild trust, to find a path that keeps both our legacy and our future intact." He looked away, the fire in his eyes dimming briefly. "You don't understand what I'm trying to do. This isn't about sentiment. It's about survival. The company must grow or perish." "This," I said, nodding toward the folder filled with legal weight, "is about preserving the foundation that allowed us to survive for decades. If we lose that, no growth will matter." Sarah's voice cut through the tension, tight and cold. "Maybe it's time to accept that the past holds us back. We have to move forward, or we all lose." I met her gaze steadily. Respect and justice did not bind us for generations by accident. They are timeless values. Without them, nothing remains safe. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, frustration mingling with a dawning awareness. Although his ambitions still burned fiercely, there was hesitation and unspoken conflict between legacy and progress, between defiance and family ties. I softened my tone, knowing this moment was both fragile and pivotal. "This is not the end, Daniel. It is a chance to pause, to reflect on what family truly means. My door remains open, but the legacy will remain protected." For a long moment, he said nothing. The fire in his eyes flickered, uncertainty beginning to cloud his certainty. Then, slowly, he nodded. Maybe we rushed this." As the meal ended, our glances carried new understanding, tenuous, but real. Though Daniel's drive had not vanished, the certainty had ebbed, unsettled by the truth's quiet but unyielding force. I was weary but victorious in a way that mattered most. The papers I held, the evidence laid bare, and my silent steadiness had shifted the tide. I was still the guardian of our family's heart, standing firm even when betrayal threatened to upend everything. This victory was more than legal, it was a renewal of something sacred. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it lies in the steady, unshakable resolve of one who refuses to yield. And so, in the lingering calm after the storm, I knew I had reclaimed more than a company. I had reclaimed the honor and hope that bind us together, the unbroken spirit of family and legacy that will carry us forward. After that evening, a profound stillness settled over the house, as if the very walls exhaled a breath they had been holding for years. Daniel and Sarah departed quietly, carrying with them the weight of a decision foreclosed not by conflict, but by unwavering resolve. Their absence left a silence that was not empty, but filled with the promise of healing and renewal. I wandered through the rooms that had witnessed our family's unfolding story, the laughter, the tears, the quiet moments of love and hardship intertwined. Each corner held pieces of the past, fragments of life carefully preserved. Yet now, the house no longer felt burdened by betrayal. Instead, it shimmered with the steady pulse of reclaimed hope. The business was once again mine, not just by legal right, but by the strength forged through years of sacrifice and steadfast devotion. Holding the personal artifacts that had become symbols of our legacy, the faded photographs, the ledger thick with records, the grandfather clock marking passing time, I felt a deep connection to those who came before me, and a renewed responsibility toward those who would follow. In solitude, I reflected on the journey from silence to strength. The quiet battles I fought had shaped me more than any loud victory might have. There is a power in stillness, a reservoir of endurance that becomes a fortress in the face of adversity. Tears once seen as weakness now stood as testimony to the depth of my resilience. My thoughts turned naturally to my grandchildren, whose faces held the unburdened innocence that I longed to protect. They deserved a legacy untainted by greed or division, a foundation built upon respect, honor, and unbreakable family bonds. For them, and for the future, I pledged to lead with renewed purpose and unwavering clarity. The weight of responsibility softened into a mantle of grace. The company would flourish not because of forceful commands, but through the steady guidance of values deeply rooted in justice and love. I was ready to embrace this chapter of leadership not as a victim of past wounds, but as a matriarch empowered by them. The quiet moments in the house became sanctuaries where I drew strength and found clarity. In this peace, I rediscovered the true meaning of power, not in loud proclamations or hardened anger, but in the steadfast commitment to protect, to forgive, and to heal. Standing alone amidst the relics of our family's past, I felt an undeniable truth settle within me. Silent strength is not absence but presence, the presence of heart, wisdom, and enduring courage. It is this strength that had allowed me to reclaim all that was lost and to safeguard the living spirit of our family's legacy. As I looked toward the horizon of what lay ahead, I embraced the future with a steady heart. This was not merely a restoration of a business, but a reaffirmation of everything that defined us. In stillness, in quiet resolve, I had found my true power. And in that power, the legacy beat stronger than ever before.